Howdy my totally is always tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, a ranking video. And today we're going to be talking Amnesia. Yes, Amnesia, the fan favorite cult classic now survival horror series. Amnesia has stretched far and wide across the horror medium. And when that original game came out, it really was a beacon of hope for horror games, and it would go on to influence many other horror games as well. You know, obviously it's had its detractors for years, but Amnesia still is one of the most popular horror series around, not only for YouTuber clickbait, but for providing interesting, thoughtful, different horror experiences than you would get with, say, Resident Evil or Silent Hill. These games aim to be more psychological horror than just straight up horror that like Resident Evil would have with its zombies or dogs. This game would be much more about your character just going insane and seeing things that normally they wouldn't see. At least that was how Amnesia started, with Amnesia: The Dark Descent releasing all the way back in 2010, and it was nothing more really than a small little indie game by developer Frictional Games, who had made the Penumbra series before this, but Amnesia's really when the studio took off, and after this there'd be a couple more Amnesia games. They'd have Soma, and now recently releasing Amnesia: The Bunker, their biggest and most ambitious title. And you know, with The Bunker coming out, I was like, you know, let's talk about all the Amnesia games. Let's rank them all worst to best, give them all a little review, see how they stack up against each other, see how they've aged, how scary are they, how interesting is the story, how's the gameplay. You know how these go, and if you don't, you should subscribe, because we're looking at horror games, we're looking at really every type of game, and we're just ranking them. We're ranking them, giving reviews. Anyway, Amnesia. Hopefully I don't get amnesia by the end of this video. We've got 4 games in the series. We've got Amnesia: The Dark Descent, we've got Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs, Amnesia: Rebirth, and now the recently released Amnesia: The Bunker. So let's take a look at them. Let me know down below your favorite Amnesia game, your favorite horror games, all that good stuff. Like, share, sub, comment. What do I think is the weakest of these games? Let's find out. And so here we have Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs, releasing in 2013. This game was actually not developed by Frictional Games, just published by them. It was actually developed by a different developer known as the Chinese Room. And oh, does it show that this was not developed by Frictional Games, as this is a very different type of horror experience from the first Amnesia. The developers of this game made like Dear Esther and Everybody's Gone to Rapture, not really the most interactive experiences, more narrative-driven walking simulators than really full-on gameplay experiences. And so I was curious, you know, how are they going to tackle Amnesia? And I remember getting this game back, checks notes, 10 years ago. Okay, 10 whole years ago this game came out, which is crazy to think about, but yeah, I got it back then. I remember being very disappointed with it, and by the time I finished it, I was like, wow, I didn't really like that. I didn't think that was very good, and all these years later, I still feel the same way. So I guess this game takes place in the same universe as the original Amnesia, but you wouldn't know it because there's really no connection to it at all. That's different characters, different setting, different area in the world. And it takes place in London. You play as Oswald Mandus, a wealthy industrialist and butcher who is implied, I guess, to be related to the original protagonist, but I don't know. And let's just say he's starting to lose it after waking up from a fever that lasted for a few months, and the game just kind of goes from there. I won't spoil it since it is such a narrative-heavy game, but I'm gonna just say, you know, there's a couple themes in this game that are pretty dark and pretty sad, but overall, I just didn't really care too much for it. Like, I didn't find it all that interesting. I didn't find it anywhere near as interesting as the first game. And I wasn't the strongest supporter of the conclusion or really the ending. Now, the game is very narrative focused, like there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of talking, reading, listening, exploring. Really, it's all about getting yourself immersed in this story, and I wasn't really that big on the story. It just didn't really hit with me. I know some people have really enjoyed it, but I don't know, I just was like, eh. I get that it's supposed to seem a bit all over the place, it's an Amnesia game, but this game seemed even more all over the place than the original, to the point where I was just like, not only is this a bit confusing, but it just seems like it has no focus at this point. And by the end of it, I guess things start to go off the rails, but I just didn't really care all that much. And then we have the gameplay. You know, the game, like I said, it was developed by the people who made Dear Esther, which is literally just about a guy walking around and listening to dialogue. So I didn't expect it to be as involved as the first Amnesia, but this game really feels like a dumbed down version, a simpler version of the original Amnesia, not for the better. All the gameplay really amounts to is just kind of walking around solving incredibly basic puzzles that involve you just picking stuff up and putting it somewhere else, occasionally dodging these pig creatures that are just stupid as rock. like dumb as a doorknob, like just truly idiotic creatures that are incredibly easy to dodge, and then you'll be flipping switches and listening to the narrative, and that's really it. Like, you have this lantern that has infinite light, so you don't even need to manage that. There's no inventory management at all, you know. Part of it being a survival horror game is inventory or resource management, and you don't do any of that in this game. And so all it again amounts to is just solving puzzles, walking forward, flipping switches, walking past these pig creatures, and listening to the narrative. And then the game's incredibly short also. It's like 2, maybe 3 hours on a first playthrough, and by the time I was done with it, I was just incredibly unsatisfied. The loop, it's not exciting, it's not interesting, it's not scary. The story, I just didn't really care for. This game just didn't really have anything going for it. Sure, it had a nice presentation and it wasn't buggy or glitchy or anything like that, but I just can't really recommend this game, even for horror enthusiasts. And so here we have Amnesia Rebirth releasing in 2020 now. I remember when this game came out, I was pretty skeptical of it because I was so disappointed with the Machine for Pigs. I didn't play this game until a year or two later when I got it nice and cheap. And I gotta say, Amnesia Rebirth, it's a step in the right direction, but I still wouldn't say it's as good as, say, The Dark Descent. But what you have is an interesting horror experience. The plot is probably the best part of this entire game. It's actually very interesting. You wake up on Algeria after your plane crash lands there. You have no memory of what exactly was going on before you were even here, though. You play as this French drafter known as Tassi, and you're just trying to figure out where everyone went and what's going on, and I'll leave it at that. The story, I actually quite liked the story. I thought it was quite interesting. I think the setup is good, the setting is really unique, the way the game progresses is actually really interesting, and I think by the end of it, yeah, I actually thoroughly enjoyed the story. Is it amazing? Is it a spectacular storytelling? No, I don't think it's that, but it had me hooked for the entire game at least. And I think the mystery and intrigue that this game has, yeah, it's actually good. Again, it's the strongest part of this game is the story, the storytelling, the voice acting. I think all of that is actually really well done. When it comes to the gameplay, it's not as exciting. This game, it has more horror elements than A Machine for Pigs, but it is still kind of a dumbed down Dark Descent. So the game is played from the first perspective, and it's got a bunch of Amnesia staples like how you have to open the door with like moving the mouse or analog stick all the way, flicking switches. There is some light sources here. You do actually have a fuel lamp that does not have infinite fuel. You will have to actually look around for fuel and scavenge. There are matches as well to provide light. Light is incredibly important in this game, as they did bring this element back from the Dark Descent, where the longer you're in darkness, you'll start to see stuff, you'll start to hear stuff. Really, you just kind of start going insane. It's not to the level that the Dark Descent would go to, but it's here, and I'm glad that it came back, and I'm glad that it's here in some capacity. But what are you trying to do in these environments besides not lose your mind? You're solving puzzles and really just going from one area to the next with some basic scavenging. The puzzles in this game, nothing's too taxing. There is a lot of puzzles, though I will say that. There's probably more here than the Dark Descent, actually. There's just a bunch of puzzles, and you'll be looking around, picking up items, flicking switches, the good stuff, the typical Amnesia puzzles that if you played any of these games, you know what to expect. And then there's when the monsters show up. You can't get into combat. There's no combat here. You can either run away or hide from the monsters, and that's pretty much it. I mean, the encounters here aren't exactly the most challenging. If you lose to them, the game just straight gives you the option to skip them entirely, which, hey, you might want to do, because some of these can get pretty annoying and they can actually drag out a little bit. The game doesn't drag out a little bit. It's got a decent length to it. It didn't take me too long, but I'll be real, this game isn't the most memorable experience, at least to me. Like, it's got plenty of decent elements. Again, I really like the story and the voice acting and the setting, and some of the puzzles are interesting. The encounters, well, they exist, but I wouldn't say the game is really all that scary. I mean, it scared me like once or twice. There was some jump scares here, but I generally would not say it's the most intimidating experience horror-wise. You're not going to be shitting your pants like the Dark Descent, and I also just didn't think this game was all that memorable. Like, as I was trying to, think about this game to talk about it, I was kind of having trouble remembering a lot of parts of this game. Like, there were some memorable parts, but overall, yeah, I would say it is a bit of a forgettable experience. So should you play this game? I mean, it's got a good presentation, a good story, and it tells that good tale, but If you're looking for an excellent survival horror experience, you're really not going to find one here, as the gameplay does feel a little dumbed down still from the Dark Descent. It's not as involved, it's not as challenging, and it just wasn't as rewarding of an experience, and I didn't really get all that scared. So horror enthusiasts maybe play, everyone else, you could probably just skip it. And so this might be a hot take, but here we have Amnesia: The Dark Descent releasing back in 2010. Yes, the classic that really won all those awards and got all the YouTubers to lose their mind online, getting the shit scared out of them. The original Amnesia, it's still a classic and a survival horror must play. I really can easily recall back in 2010, 2011 when like all the YouTubers were playing this and I was like, oh, I gotta play this, and I played it then, and I actually played it a couple years ago, and I think it's actually still aged quite well, and it's still a really enjoyable time, especially if you love horror games. Now, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, it has a very interesting setting, taking place in the fun year of 1839. You know, you name one thing that happened that year and I'm gonna give you a nice smooch. But yeah, it takes place in 1839, and it takes place in this castle where you just wake up with really no memory about anything, and you just really are exploring this castle. All you can remember is that your name is Daniel, and you're finding a bunch of notes from yourself, from others, and you're just trying to piece everything together. The story is very interesting. I know a number of people don't like the storytelling in Amnesia, where you gotta find a bunch of notes and piece stuff together, but I don't know, I thought it was intriguing and it's different from the norm. Yes, you absolutely can miss important story elements if you don't read the note, but I mean, these notes are usually pretty short and they're not exactly the hardest reads. I think the storytelling is more than serviceable, and I think the story is actually good, and it does have a really intriguing premise, and it actually lives up to the name of Amnesia, where you really don't remember shit and like nothing comes back to you. I also think as you progress through the game, it continues to stay interesting all the way up until the very end. Something that is really worth mentioning about this game is its atmosphere. I think the game's atmosphere is actually really well done. Amnesia, Rebirth, and A Machine for Pigs, I couldn't tell you shit about that atmosphere. The vibes in those games, there really were none. Here, it's dark, it's depressing, there's some real vibes here. This game puts off a great atmosphere, and it really hit me in the feels. Even all these years later, I'm like, yeah, this game hits different. None of the other Amnesia games hit like this, and it's one of the game's strongest aspects. When it comes to the gameplay, this was not too far off from the Penumbra games, but it was evolved on a little bit. So it's a first-person exploration survival horror game where it's all about, you know, kind of just going from room to room, area to area, just continuing through, trying to figure out everything, piece everything together. And how do you do that? Well, you explore. You do a lot of exploration. You explore rooms by really opening up everything that you can possibly open. You use the mouse or the analog stick to open doors, open drawers, open closets. You're opening everything. If it exists and you can open it, you're going to open it here. You can open books, you can move chairs, you can actually interact with almost the entire environment, and the physics are actually pretty decent here. You can open just about any door that isn't locked, including your mom's. You'll be carrying stuff all over, you'll be finding key items and placing them, you'll be solving puzzles with the physics, you'll be solving puzzles with items and more items and items for the item. Yeah, there's a lot of puzzle solving here. In fact, a majority of the gameplay is this exploration and puzzle solving. And you know, I know plenty of people have played this game who expected some really scary experience and just ended up getting confused and lost and turned the game off because they couldn't get very far in the game. And I gotta say, you know, a couple of these puzzles you might need to walk through. There's actually some brain taxers here, but I think most of the puzzles are decent enough, especially when they involve the physics. I actually like them. But when you aren't doing anything with the physics or the puzzles or exploration, you're, you know, avoiding the monsters that are trying to get you. So Amnesia, it actually brought in this mechanic from Eternal Darkness back on the GameCube, where you have a sanity meter. You actually will start to go insane if you're in the darkness too long, or if you stare at the monsters too long, and you'll start to hear shit, you'll start to see stuff, and you can actually just straight die by just going completely insane and scaring yourself to death, basically. It was a unique mechanic in Eternal Darkness, and it's unique all these years later. I don't really know why many games don't try it. I think it's a really interesting mechanic, and I think the way that it's dealt with in The Dark Descent is one of the best depictions of this mechanic ever being in a video game, as this shit actually gets scary. The monsters are scary, and I've had the shit scared out of me plenty of times, no matter how many times I've played this game. Like, this is a scary game, at least for me. Yeah, you can't really fight back and you just gotta run away and hide, which I know some people don't like, but I still found this game scary as hell, man. Especially when the monsters show up. Like, fuck, man, this game has made me scream in the middle of the night, and my parents, that's how long ago it was, came in and went, "What the hell's wrong with you? Shut the hell up." And it was like, I'm sorry, man, this game is scary. Like, this game it can scare you, especially, you know, it's late, got some headphones on. There's a reason all those streamers and YouTubers played this game, because it is actually scary thanks to its amazing atmosphere, the monsters, these mechanics that it has. And the game's got a good length to it on top of a really just disturbing dark mystery. Yeah, this game is scary. It does have some survival elements. You know, you gotta manage like your light, and there are some items you gotta collect and store up. So I mean, there is some survival elements. No, it's not a survival horror like Silent Hill or Resident Evil or anything like that. And I know plenty of people have hated what Amnesia did for scary games, horror games, survival horror in general, but I really like this game. All these years later, I still think it's worth playing if you haven't experienced it. And anyone who likes horror in general, yeah, try this game. It's a good time. And I'm shocked, but here we have in the #1 spot, Amnesia the Bunker, just recently releasing. You know, I really didn't have much expectation for this game, but after just finishing this game yesterday, wow, Amnesia the Bunker is actually a really solid horror game, and in my opinion, like the best of the Amnesia games. No, it doesn't have the classic atmosphere and some of the elements of the Dark Descent, but I was really impressed by the Bunker. The game has an incredibly different atmosphere and story and setting from the other Amnesia games. It takes place in World War I and sees your character, you know, just trying not to get killed in the war, and it sees him falling into this bunker and basically just getting stuck. And not only is he stuck, but there seems to be this giant monster going around killing not only all of your teammates, but it's out for you as well. And so you just got to get the hell out of the bunker. And you know, the story, it's really easy to understand. There isn't a bunch of notes all over the place to piece together the story. It just kind of throws it at you immediately. All of the notes and the lore have to do with the soldiers, the monster itself, where it came from, and all that interesting side stuff. And I think the story, you know, it doesn't need to be the most complex to be good. I actually quite like the story here. I'm not going to say it's the best of the Amnesia stories, but I think it's more than solid enough. The premise, though, is great. The premise is just really well done. The game's atmosphere and the vibes, you know, this game has it. This game just gets it. It's a really tense, dark, terrible atmosphere. I mean, World War I is already pretty dark and pretty evil and sinister, especially when you really think about it. They were stuck in the trenches and it was just shit. It was just really shit, and this game just captures that really well. I mean, you're in this terrible, horrible bunker, and the war is still going on. Like, bombs are still going off. The game constantly shakes, and it's just a really dark, depressing atmosphere, and they really nailed it here. They really nailed it on the presentation side also. This is basically an indie game. It is an indie game, and it looks phenomenal for an indie game. Like, it looks excellent. It ran really well. And the voice acting, what little there is, it's actually quite good. The presentation and the vibes, the atmosphere, story, setting, all of that just gets a big thumbs up from me. It is really great, actually. Now, the gameplay is where Amnesia actually evolved a bit. It actually has more to it than just kind of running away from the monster and trying not to go insane in the dark. In fact, the first thing I'll say about the gameplay is it doesn't have that. If you're in the dark, you don't go insane. The game doesn't have that mechanic where you start to go crazy by being in the dark or looking at the monster, and I know plenty of people have already gotten mad that this game doesn't have it. I'm glad this game doesn't have it, otherwise you'd be going insane like the whole game, because what you have instead is you have a monster that is following you the entire game. Really, from the first like 20 minutes to the very end of the game, you have this giant monster that you never really fully see all the way chasing after you, kind of like an Alien Isolation, but this is really the whole game, and the whole game is built around this monster going after you, and it's not dumb as rocks either. The pathfinding isn't stupid as hell. It's actually decently smart, and the game really will adapt to what you're doing. See, it's following you. It can track you in a number of different ways. It follows sound primarily, and it also won't go in the light. So everything you do, you got to think about the sound you're making, because you could totally alert the monster to where you are, and stuff like a grenade will pretty much bring it on your ass immediately. But other things like running or opening doors really loud or shooting a gun. Yes, you do actually get a gun in this game, and you can shoot it. Ammo is stupid limited though. Like, you'll have a better time finding a good deal in a Whole Foods before you find any ammo in this game. Seriously, the ammo's super limited. But yes, there is actually a gun that you can shoot, and you can shoot the monster. You can't kill it, but you can scare it off. It really is only like as a last measure resort, especially thanks to just how limited the ammo is. But sound is a huge factor. The other factor, like I mentioned, is the light. See, there's a generator in the bunker in your home base, and it isn't going to stay on forever. You need to put fuel in that bad boy to keep it on, to keep the lights on. Otherwise, this thing is just going to move everywhere and you're going to die real fast if you're just in the dark. And so you got to find fuel throughout the bunker and put it in. You have a nice little timer to tell you how much time is left on the generator, and this really adds to the atmosphere with a lot of anxiety and a sense of urgency to everything you're doing, because fuel is limited in this game and you can really be up shit creek. And it just, yeah, it added to my anxiety and it really created a sense of dread that I haven't seen in many other games. So the question is, outside of trying not to get killed by this thing, what are you doing in this game? Well, you're exploring a number of areas in the bunker, trying to basically piece together some dynamite so you can blow up the exit and get out of there. And to do this, you have to explore a bunch of areas, you have to solve some puzzles. None of the puzzles are too complicated. These are probably some of the easiest puzzles in the series, and I thought they were fine, but yeah, you'll be solving some puzzles, you'll be exploring, you'll be doing some item inventory management. There's actually a lot of inventory management because the inventory is really small and they give you a lot of stuff to carry, and you're going to be going back and forth between your home base. Just make sure to lock the door. Now, there's actually quite a bit to explore with this bunker, and what's cool is this game is actually kind of non-linear in its progression. You can get the pieces to the dynamite in almost any order, and so you can have playthroughs that are pretty different from each other in terms of which order you get the stuff. And I thought the level design was actually pretty good. Like, I actually really enjoyed it. You know, the other games, the level design was just kind of there. I wouldn't say it was anything special. Here, though, I was like, no, this is good. This is actually good, and I can appreciate it. You know, when I'm not shitting my pants, because this game is scary. This game is actually quite scary. In fact, this is maybe the scariest of all the Amnesia games. I was like, holy shit, this game is not fucking around pretty much right from the get-go. It is a scary game. Even with the gun, even with the grenades, even with all this stuff, the game frequently still scared me, and it had me on the edge of my seat. It actually does create tension, and it does create a really horrifying atmosphere, and I think that the game should be commended for that. It's actually quite a good survival horror game. And yeah, it's not the longest experience, it's maybe 4 or 5 hours long, but it ends before it even gets old, and this game is incredibly replayable. Again, thanks to that non-linear design and just how you could go about the game. I have no problem recommending this game. I think it's actually one of the best survival horror games of the year, and that is saying something. With the RE4 remake, the Dead Space remake, potentially the Silent Hill 2 remake. No, this game, I don't think it should be missed, especially if you like survival horror. It's on the Game Pass, so if you got the PC for it or an Xbox, you can go play it right now for the cheap, so please go play it. It's one of the best survival horror experiences you'll have all year, and it's one of the biggest surprise hits I've had this year. I did not expect to like the game this much, and I can't believe I kind of like it more than The Dark Descent. We'll see in a couple years how I actually feel about it, but at this moment in time, yes, I think it's a better game than The Dark Descent, and you should go play it. That's it for this video. If you made it to this part, comment bricks as in what you use to build a house or what you can throw in the bunker, and I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.